August 12, 1121, 56,000 Georgians faced 300,000 Seljuk invaders on a blood-soaked hillside, and in 3 hours erased an empire's ambitions. Historians still cannot fully explain how. The mathematics of Didgori should have been a death sentence. 1 Georgian soldier for every 6 enemy warriors. A Christian kingdom surrounded by Islamic empires that had spent decades bleeding its borders dry. A young king whose own nobles had once doubted his sanity when he proposed this confrontation, and a coalition army so massive that contemporary chroniclers claimed it took 3 full days just to assemble into marching formation. This was not supposed to be a battle. This was supposed to be an execution. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how David IV of Georgia, a 30-year-old monarch dismissed by his enemies as a mountain princeling, orchestrated one of the most devastating tactical ambush in medieval military history. You will witness how terrain, psychology, and a group of 300 suicidal warriors transformed impossible odds into absolute annihilation. How David the Builder turned certain defeat into the greatest victory in Caucasian history. Why Ilghazi ibn Artuk, the most feared Seljuk commander of his generation, made a fatal tactical error that no military historian saw coming, and the hidden 60-minute window that permanently altered the balance of power between Christendom and Islam in the medieval East. What you are about to hear is not legend dressed as history. Every formation, every movement, every blade of grass on that August morning has been reconstructed from Georgian royal chronicles, Arabic military accounts, and modern archaeological surveys. This is the battle that changed everything. Why did David IV reject the counsel of every single military advisor who begged him to retreat into the mountains and wait for the Seljuk coalition to fracture on its own? What really happened to the 300 condemned criminals David released from Georgian dungeons and armed with nothing but short swords and an impossible promise? And why do medieval Arabic sources describe them as demons wearing the faces of men? How did 56,000 soldiers, most of whom had never fought together before, execute a tactical maneuver so complex that modern military academies still study its geometry? What did Ilghazi see in the final moments before the Georgian counterattack that made him a commander who had crushed Crusader armies and humiliated European princes abandon his own bodyguard and flee on foot through a ravine? And why, in the 9 centuries since Didgori, has no army ever successfully replicated David's formation, despite having complete access to every chronicle, every map, and every surviving tactical document from that August morning? To understand Didgori, you must first understand what Georgia had become by the early 12th century. For 60 years before David's reign, the kingdom of Georgia had been a carcass that neighboring empires picked clean at their leisure. The great Turkish invasion of the 1080s had reduced this once proud Caucasian kingdom to a rump state clinging to its mountain fortresses while Seljuk raiders burned its valleys, enslaved its peasantry, and turned its ancient capital of Tbilisi into a Muslim-administered city that Georgian kings could see from their highland refuges but could not touch. David's father, George II, had ruled a kingdom of ghosts. Tax revenues had collapsed. The aristocracy had fragmented into petty fiefdoms more interested in local survival than national resurrection. The Georgian Orthodox Church, the spiritual backbone of the nation, had watched its monasteries looted and its clergy scattered. By 1089, when the 15-year-old David IV inherited this devastated throne, foreign observers gave Georgia perhaps 2 generations before complete absorption into the Seljuk sphere. David was supposed to be a caretaker king, managing decline until inevitable extinction. He became something else entirely. Over the next 30 years, David IV embarked on one of the most methodical military and administrative rebuilding programs in medieval history. He crushed his own rebellious nobles with calculated brutality, confiscating their lands and redistributing them to loyal commanders. He reformed the Georgian military from a feudal levy system into a semi-professional standing army, with standardized equipment and regular training rotations. He invited 40,000 Kipchak warriors, steppe nomads fleeing Mongol pressure to the north, to settle in Georgia, converting them to Christianity and integrating them into his cavalry corps. Most critically, he waited. While Seljuk successor states fractured into civil wars following the death of Sultan Malik Shah I, David picked his targets with surgical patience. He recaptured fortress after fortress, never overextending, never provoking a coalition response. By 1120, he had recovered most of historical Georgia, except for Tbilisi itself, the jewel that had eluded his family for half a century. That year, David made his move. He stopped paying tribute to the Seljuk successor states entirely. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Hacı ibn Artuk, ruler of Mardin and the most successful Seljuk military commander of his era, assembled a coalition that medieval chroniclers would describe with breathless superlatives: the Artukids of Mesopotamia, the Damascene contingent, the emirs of Aleppo and Mosul, Turkmen tribal federations from across Anatolia, even Arab mercenary companies from as far as Egypt. The Georgian chronicler would later write that Ilghazi's host numbered as the stars of heaven and the sands of the sea. More conservative estimates drawn from logistical calculations of the food, water, and fodder such an army would require placed a Seljuk coalition at approximately 300,000 combatants, with perhaps 120,000 of those being frontline cavalry and infantry, the remainder being support personnel, camp followers, and tribal levies of questionable military value. Against this, David could field approximately 56,000 soldiers. 40,000 were Georgian regulars and feudal levies. 15,000 were his Kipchak cavalry allies. And somewhere between 200 and 500 were the mysterious Maklabi, the condemned men. David had personally recruited from prisons across his kingdom with a promise that would echo through military history. The chronicler Matthew of Edessa, writing from the perspective of the nearby Crusader states, recorded the prevailing sentiment. All of Christendom believed Georgia would fall before the first leaves of autumn touched the ground. David IV had a different belief entirely. The army that crossed into Georgian territory in the summer of 1121 represented the largest military concentration the Caucasus region had witnessed in over 3 centuries. Manpower composition. At its core stood approximately 45,000 heavy cavalry drawn from the professional military households of the Artukid, Seljuk, and Damascene successor states. These were the Golan tradition slave soldiers purchased as boys, raised in martial discipline, and equipped with the finest arms Islamic metalworking could produce. They wore lamellar armor of overlapping iron or steel plates, carried composite bows capable of penetrating chain mail at 150 meters, and wielded straight-bladed swords optimized for the powerful downward cuts that had shattered Crusader formations at the Field of Blood just 2 years earlier. Surrounding this professional nucleus were approximately 60,000 Turkmen tribal cavalry, lighter, faster, and far less disciplined. These steppe warriors fought in loose swarms, showering enemies with arrows before closing for saber work. They carried small round shields, wore leather or quilted armor, and rode horses bred for endurance rather than the shock charges preferred by their heavier cousins. The infantry component, often overlooked in cavalry-centric analyses of medieval Middle Eastern warfare, numbered approximately 35,000. The Arab and Syrian foot soldiers carried large shields, short spears, and wore chain-mail shirts over quilted gambesons. Their primary tactical role was defensive, anchoring positions while cavalry wings executed encircling maneuvers. Elite units. Ilghazi's personal bodyguard numbered approximately 3,000 men, equipped identically to their master. Full lamellar coverage, face-covering helmets with mail aventails, and the distinctive red-dyed horse blankets that marked them as the emir's own. The Damascene contingent included 500 mounted crossbowmen, an unusual unit for Islamic armies of this period, likely influenced by contact with Crusader military innovations. These men carried heavy crossbows that required dismounting to reload, but could punch through Georgian plate armor at close range. Psychological tools. The Seljuk coalition traveled with dedicated drum corps mounted on camels. These Tabal-Khana units produced a continuous rolling thunder that could be heard up to 5 kilometers away, designed to unnerve enemy horses and communicate basic tactical commands across the vast frontage of a 300,000-man host. Ahead of the main army rode the Karhatsa screening cavalry, whose primary purpose was not combat, but terror. They burned farmsteads, slaughtered livestock, and left crucified prisoners along roadsides to advertise the cost of resistance. Hidden advantages. Ilghazi had crushed a Crusader army at the Field of Blood, Ager Sanguinis, in 1119, killing Roger of Salerno and virtually annihilating the Principality of Antioch's military capability. His soldiers had tasted Christian blood and found it spilled easily. Their confidence was not arrogance, it was earned through recent, documented success against the best warriors Latin Christendom could field. Tactical weaknesses. The coalition's greatest strength was simultaneously its most dangerous vulnerability. 300,000 men drawn from a dozen different political entities shared no common language of command. Orders had to pass through layers of translation. Ilghazi commanded directly only his own Artukid contingent. The Damascene, Aleppan, and Turkmen elements followed their own emirs, who cooperated through negotiation rather than hierarchical obedience. Supply was the invisible enemy. An army of this size required approximately 600,000 liters of water daily for men alone. Horses tripled that figure. The coalition had to keep moving or die of thirst. Extended engagements on ground, not of their choosing, would be metabolically catastrophic. David IV's force was smaller by a factor of nearly 6 to 1, but it possessed advantages that would not become apparent until steel met steel on the hillside of Didgori. Manpower composition. The core of David's army consisted of approximately 25,000 regular Georgian infantry and cavalry raised through the royal military reform system David had implemented over 15 years. These were not seasonal feudal levies called from farm work. They were soldiers who trained year-round, received standardized equipment from royal armories, and followed a common tactical doctrine personally developed by the king. Georgian heavy cavalry, the Asnari warrior class, numbered approximately 8,000. They wore distinctive scale armor manufactured in Georgian workshops, using a technique that layered bronze over iron, producing a flexible protection that could deflect slashing strikes while remaining light enough for mountain warfare. Their primary weapon was the shubi, a 10-foot lance designed for the couched charge technique that Frankish knights had made famous, but which Georgians had independently developed. The Kipchak contingent provided 15,000 light cavalry archers, the finest horse archers available outside the Mongol steppe. These warriors had grown up in the saddle, learning to shoot from horseback before they could walk properly on the ground. They wore minimal armor, typically just a leather cap and a quilted jacket, prioritizing mobility over protection. Their composite bows, smaller than the Seljuk equivalent, were optimized for rapid fire rather than armor penetration. The remaining Georgian forces consisted of infantry levies from various mountain districts, equipped with spears, axes, and the large oval shields that had been standard Caucasian infantry equipment since Byzantine times. The Meklibi, the suicidal vanguard, David's most unusual unit, defies conventional military categorization. In the weeks before Didgori, David IV personally visited the dungeons of his kingdom, selecting men condemned to death for various crimes, murderers, bandits, and deserters. He offered them a choice: execution as scheduled or a place in a special unit that would lead the charge at Didgori. Those who survived would receive full pardons and land grants. Those who died would die as heroes, their sins absolved by sacrifice. Between 200 and 300 men accepted. These Meklibi were equipped with short swords, no shields, and no armor beyond leather jerkins. Their tactical purpose was not to fight conventionally, but to absorb the initial enemy countercharge, creating chaos in enemy ranks while heavier Georgian units positioned for the decisive blow. They were, in modern terminology, shock troops designed to die. Contemporary Arabic sources describe them with undisguised horror, calling them men who laughed as arrows struck them, and wolves wearing human skin who sought death as other men seek bread. Psychological tools. The Georgian army carried into battle the Holy Cross of Manglissia, a relic believed to contain a fragment of the true cross that had been in Georgian possession since the 4th century. David positioned the cross on a hilltop visible to his entire army, its golden casing catching the morning sun. Every Georgian soldier knew they fought under divine protection. Georgian war chants, the Ivnana, were sung in unison before charges, a bass-heavy harmonic tradition that produced an almost physical pressure in the chest of anyone nearby. Hidden advantages. David had spent 6 months studying the Didgori region personally. He knew every ravine, every water source, every patch of ground where cavalry would struggle and where infantry could anchor. The Seljuk coalition was fighting blind. The Georgians were fighting in their living room. The Kipchak cavalry had no fear of the Seljuk horse archers. They had grown up fighting identical enemies on the Pontic steppe. There would be no psychological intimidation, no mystique of Turkic invincibility. The Kipchaks knew exactly how to counter every Seljuk cavalry tactic because they had invented most of them. Tactical weaknesses. Numbers. Pure, brutal numbers. If the engagement devolved into a grinding attrition battle, The Georgians would eventually be overwhelmed, regardless of tactical sophistication. David could not afford a long fight. The Didgori battlefield sits approximately 40 kilometers west of Tbilisi, in the transitional zone where the high Caucasus Mountains descend into the Georgian plateau. Elevation profile. The Georgian position occupied a series of low hills ranging from 1,400 to 1,620 meters above sea level. The Seljuk approach required ascending a gradual slope that added approximately 200 meters of elevation gain over 4 kilometers, invisible to the eye but measurable in horse fatigue and cavalry charge momentum. Key geographic features. The Ilghazi River ran along the eastern edge of the battlefield, not deep enough to prevent crossing, but muddy banked enough to slow cavalry and channel movement into predictable corridors. A series of ravines cut the western approach, carved by seasonal streams over millennia. These ravines, ranging from 3 to 8 meters deep, were invisible from the Seljuk approach angle until cavalry were almost upon them. The central plain where Ilghazi expected the main engagement measured approximately 3 kilometers wide, enough space for perhaps 15,000 cavalry to operate simultaneously. Any force larger than that would have to queue behind the front line, rendering numerical superiority meaningless in the opening phase. The first Georgian arrows fell on the Seljuk vanguard 2 full days before the main battle. David had positioned approximately 3,000 Kipchak scouts in a wide screen across the coalition's approach route, with orders not to engage seriously but to deny rest. Every time Seljuk units attempted to make camp, Kipchak arrows whistled from tree lines. Every water source became contested ground. Every night was punctuated by distant war cries and the occasional scream of a sentry who had wandered too far from firelight. By the time the main Seljuk host approached Didgori on the morning of August 11th, they had slept perhaps 4 hours total over 48. Horses that should have been fresh were already lathered. Soldiers who should have been sharp were stumbling over tent lines. The harassment accomplished something more subtle than physical exhaustion. It planted doubt. Why were the Georgians fighting for every stream and every hillside? Either they were suicidally aggressive or they knew something the coalition did not. By 5 a.m. on August 12th, the Seljuk coalition had assembled into assault formation across a 3-kilometer front. The sun was not yet visible over the eastern ridgelines, but the sky had lightened enough to reveal the Georgian positions on the hills ahead. What the coalition soldiers could not yet feel, but would soon, was the accumulating weight of their own equipment. Lamellar armor weighs between 20 and 35 kilograms depending on coverage. Helmets add another 3 to 5 kilograms. Weapons, shields, water skins, and other personal equipment push a fully armed Seljuk cavalryman's carried load to nearly 50 kilograms. On level ground in mild weather, this is sustainable. On a rising slope in thinning air, it becomes a metabolic furnace. By 7 a.m., the sun had cleared the horizon and begun its August climb. Temperatures were rising. The Seljuk foot soldiers, who had been standing in formation for 2 hours waiting for the assault order, were already drinking their water rations faster than quartermasters had planned. The smell was already present, that particular metallic organic blend of massed horses, nervous sweat, and leather equipment that every soldier from every era recognizes as the prelude to violence. Chain mail that had been merely heavy became crucibles pressing heat against skin. padding beneath armor transformed into sodden sponges that no longer wickered moisture, but simply held it against bodies already struggling to thermoregulate. At approximately 7:30 a.m., David IV ordered the Georgian army to begin singing. 40,000 voices rose in the Nana, the traditional Georgian war hymn. The sound rolled down the hillside like an avalanche, a bass-heavy drone that seemed to emerge from the earth itself rather than from human throats. The harmonic tradition of Georgian polyphonic singing meant that multiple melodic lines intertwined, creating a wall of sound that was physically disorienting to ears unaccustomed to its resonance. The Seljuk response was the tabul-kana, the great war drums that had terrified Crusader armies at the field of blood. Drummers struck their camel-mounted instruments in rhythmic thunder, attempting to drown the Georgian voices. But the Georgian singers did not stop. They did not accelerate or intensify. They simply continued, a constant pressure that the drums could not silence. At 7:45 a.m., David ordered the Holy Cross of Manglashi, raised on its pole at the highest point of the Georgian line. The gold and silver casing caught the morning sun and blazed across the battlefield, visible to every eye for 5 kilometers. Georgian soldiers crossed themselves. Many fell to their knees momentarily before their officers restored formation. Something shifted in the psychological atmosphere. The Seljuks had expected frightened defenders. They had expected men who knew they were outnumbered and doomed. Instead, they faced an army that sang hymns, displayed holy relics, and radiated an almost preternatural calm. Ilghazi felt it. Several Arabic sources record that the emir spent the hour before the battle troubled in spirit and consulting repeatedly with his astrologers. The mountain had not moved, but somehow the shadow had grown longer. Al-Shaji gave the assault order at approximately 8 a.m. 40,000 Turkmen light cavalry surged forward in the first wave, their mission to shower the Georgian lines with arrows and probe for weaknesses. Behind them, the heavy Artukid cavalry began their slower advance, horses walking rather than cantering to conserve energy for the killing charge that would shatter whatever remained after the arrow storm. The Georgians did something unexpected. They retreated. The entire Georgian front line, 20,000 infantry, and the visible cavalry units began moving backward up the hillside, not in panicked rout, but in disciplined withdrawal, shields raised against the incoming arrows, ranks maintained. The Turkmen cavalry, their blood rising with the thrill of apparent victory, pressed forward harder. Horses scrambled up the steepening slope. Riders leaned forward in their saddles to compensate for the angle. The Georgian singing stopped. In the sudden silence, the Turkmen commanders felt the first flutter of unease. Something was wrong. This did not feel like victory. This felt like walking into a room and sensing that the furniture had been recently moved, but being unable to identify which piece. The first ravine claimed approximately 200 horses in under 30 seconds. The Turkmen vanguard, pursuing what they believed to be fleeing Georgians, rode directly into a gully that had been invisible from their approach angle. Horses screamed as forelegs shattered against limestone. Riders were catapulted forward onto rocks. The men behind, unable to see the hazard until they were upon it, piled into the chaos, crushing the fallen under fresh hooves. Before the Turkmen commanders could restore order, the Kipchak countercharge began. 15,000 steppe warriors, who had been concealed in dead ground to the Georgian right flank, emerged in a single wave. They were not charging the Turkmen front. They were angling toward the gap between the light cavalry and the heavy, our two-cod formation still advancing 500 meters behind. The trap was sprung. The Turkmen vanguard found themselves cut off from support, pinned against ravines on their left, facing regrouped Georgian infantry ahead, and now receiving Kipchak arrows from their right flank. Men who had been chasing glory 10 minutes earlier were suddenly fighting for survival. And somewhere in the Georgian ranks 300 condemned men began to laugh. The Maclebi charged at 8:12 a.m. 300 men who had accepted death as their payment for redemption broke from the Georgian lines and ran, not walked, not advanced tactically, but simply ran at full sprint directly toward the densest concentration of Turkmen cavalry. They had no formation. They had no shields. They had short swords that required them to get within arm's reach of mounted warriors to be effective. What they had was the complete absence of fear. The Arabic chronicler Ibn al-Athir, writing half a century later, described what happened next with rare restraint. There emerged from among the Georgians men who had no regard for their lives, and they fell upon the Turkmen like wolves upon sheep, and the Turkmen could not understand what manner of creatures these were. The Turkmen horses panicked first. Horses are prey animals. Their deepest instincts respond to predator behavior: sudden sprinting approach, focus, absence of hesitation. The Maclebi displayed every characteristic that horse evolution had learned to fear. The cavalry mounts began refusing commands, rearing, spinning away from the approaching madmen. A cavalryman on a panicking horse is not a warrior. He is a passenger on a terror-stricken animal weighing 600 kilograms. The Maclebi waded into the chaos with their short swords, hamstring horses, dragging riders from saddles, fighting with a ferocity that appeared supernatural because it was utterly divorced from the self-preservation instinct that governs normal combat behavior. Within 6 minutes, the Turkmen vanguard's formation ceased to exist as a military unit. It had become a panicked mass of men and horses trying to escape in every direction simultaneously. And David IV, watching from his command position, gave the signal for the main Georgian cavalry charge. At 8:15 a.m., the sound began a low rumble that Seljuk soldiers initially mistook for distant thunder. The August sky was cloudless. There could be no thunder. The Georgian heavy cavalry emerged from concealed positions on the hillside's western slope in an echelon formation that stretched 300 meters. 8,000 armored horsemen, lances couched, moving at a coordinated canter that would transition to full gallop at precisely the calculated distance from impact. The morning sun blazed behind them. Every Seljuk archer trying to sight on the approaching mass found themselves shooting into golden fire. At 8:17 a.m., the first Georgian lances struck Seljuk flesh. A couched lance charge delivers the combined momentum of horse and rider through a steel point, approximately 2 centimeters wide. A 600-kilogram warhorse moving at 40 kilometers per hour generates kinetic energy equivalent to a modern automobile collision. The lance does not merely wound, it transmits catastrophic force through the target's body, shattering bone, rupturing organs, and often penetrating completely through one man to wound another behind him. The sound of massed cavalry impact defies adequate description. Witnesses invariably reach for natural disaster metaphors: thunderclaps, collapsing buildings, avalanche roar. But beneath the macro-level violence was a terrible intimacy, the wet crunch of ribs giving way, The explosive exhalation of men who died before they could scream, the high-pitched shriek of steel grinding against steel. At 8:19 a.m., the Georgian cavalry had penetrated 60 meters into the Seljuk formation. Lances shattered and were discarded. Riders drew swords and maces, transitioning to close combat, while their momentum continued, carrying them deeper into enemy ranks. Each Georgian was surrounded by enemies, but each Georgian was also supported by comrades, driving relentlessly forward on every side. The Seljuk foot soldiers nearest the impact zone tried to form a defensive line. Their training told them to anchor, to present a wall of spear points that would slow the cavalry and allow the numerical advantage to tell. Their training had not prepared them for horses that did not slow, that drove directly into spear points, that died while still crushing men beneath their falling weight. At 8:21 a.m., the Kipchak cavalry completed their encirclement of the Turkmen survivors. The 15,000 steppe warriors had spent the previous 9 minutes maintaining steady archery pressure while avoiding decisive engagement. Now, with the Georgian heavy cavalry driving deep into the Seljuk center, the Kipchaks transitioned to pursuit mode. A horse archer in pursuit is more dangerous than a horse archer in static shooting. The pursuing archer can close to point-blank range, negating armor advantages. The fleeing target cannot return fire effectively while twisting in the saddle. Every stride opens the range for an easy killing shot. The Turkmen who tried to flee west ran into the ravines. Those who fled east ran into the Ilghazi River's muddy banks. Those who fled south found the Georgian infantry advancing to seal the escape route. Those who stood and fought died where they stood. At 8:24, a man, Ilghazi ibn Artuk, ordered his personal guard to charge. The emir had watched the destruction of his vanguard with growing horror, but he was not yet defeated. His 3,000 elite horsemen, the finest warriors in the coalition, had been held in reserve for precisely this scenario. They would strike the Georgian cavalry in the flank, disrupting the momentum that was shredding his army. The Artukid bodyguard charged with professional discipline, maintaining formation even as they accelerated. Their red horse blankets created a river of crimson flowing across the battlefield. At 8:25 a.m., David IV committed his final reserve. 2,000 Georgian heavy cavalry, held back from the initial charge, emerged from dead ground on the hillside and struck the Artukid bodyguard's exposed flank. The geometry was devastating. The Artukids had been charging toward the Georgian cavalry's flank. Now they themselves were flanked. Warriors who had been leaning right for their killing stroke suddenly found enemies arriving from their unshielded left side. At 8:27 a.m., the first Artukid bodyguard broke. A single rider, his identity lost to history, wheeled his horse away from the melee and galloped toward the rear. He was probably wounded. He was certainly terrified. He made a decision that would echo across the battlefield. Another rider followed. Then 5, then 20. Panic is viral. In a cavalry melee, where every man relies on his neighbors for mutual protection, the sight of comrades fleeing triggers an immediate calculation. If I am the last one fighting, I am the first one dying. At 8:29 a.m., the Artukid bodyguard collapsed as a military unit. 3,000 elite warriors men who had crushed Crusader princes dissolved into a mass of individuals seeking personal survival. They rode over their own infantry in their desperation to escape. They trampled each other at bottleneck points. They threw away shields and weapons to lighten their horses' loads. Ilghazi was carried with them.